Hey everyone, Chris Weber back here with another episode of Weber Reviews, this time with the darling of the internet, the Rolex Explorer 2 16570, the Polar. I'm really lucky and happy to have this in the collection. I do love it. And I thought what I'd do is the little top-down view here to walk through this specific version and how it's different from the rest in the line, and then also compare it against some of the other watches in my collection that are part of its family. So this guy is different from, say, a modern Air King, which I can show. Although this guy's also different from like a Tudor GMT. So let's dive in and have a look. And there it is in all its glory, the 16570 Polar dial. This is a late 90s or perhaps 2000 model, which means what? It means that it has the holes case, solid end links, no tritium lume, and no engraving around the outside because it is still the 3185 movement. That lume is something I do want to mention. You see how white and pure it looks here. It's going to stay that way, which is nice if that's what you're into. I kind of prefer that. But it does change color in different lighting conditions. So here I've got it in pretty pure light, and you can see everything's white on white on white. But as that lume gets charged up, magic starts to occur. You can see even in pure light, if the lume is charged well, it does start mintily offsetting, which I think is really fun. As you go into different light conditions with this watch, it's alive with color. It's moving and changing all the time. Why I think this watch is so well loved amongst so many is that it wears so well because of the thinness. Yes, it's a, sweet spot width, but I think it's really the top to bottom that wears so nice. It's what makes sort of vintage Rolex. And then, of course, little tiny details that are hard to pick up, like the chamfer on the edge of the case, along this line here on the top. A tiny chamfer carved in, beautifully done, all across here as well. Now, you'll see on my sample, it has been polished pretty significantly in its life. How do I know? Well, this lug is real thin down here at the end compared to that lug on the other side. You see that thinness there? Something must have taken a chunk out over here, and they had to really get in there when they did a service and clean it up. Doesn't bother me one bit when I'm wearing it on the wrist, but now that you see it, you'll never unsee it. The other thing I often look for on these watches when I'm looking for polish is the bezel. Now, you can see how it's radiating brushing coming out across that bezel. I would rather have some dings and scratches, as you can see on that 16 there, the 4 o'clock p.m. position. See, there it is. And then still have this nice deep radial brushing than I would no scratches, but have that beautiful shimmer taken away, because it does play with the light so nicely. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a version with the solid end links and the holes case, and a lot of people talk about those hollow end links as rattlesnaking. You can see these are the solid ones. They don't have the ears that go over. But listen to this. If that's not rattlesnaking, I don't know what is. Now, on the wrist, see, it doesn't make any noise. Sorry for shaking it, making everyone seasick. But I think if you're staying away from one with hollow end links because you're afraid it's going to be rattly or make noise, don't do it. There's no difference. It makes noise. They feel the same. The clasp is still the same bent metal clasp on the backside that goes to the tuna can as you open it up, quite thin. But I'll tell you what, it works great. No problem with it. Plenty of micro adjust. Seasonally, I go from one hole to the other because it works great. It's absolutely what you want, and you don't need much else. So one of the things that I want to highlight here, just because it's one of those experiential things that happens when you're wearing the watch, but not necessarily when you're seeing it or looking at pictures, is the substantiveness. Is that a word? Substantiality? Substantation? Substrate? Listen, how substantive it is when the date changes. And what I mean by that is it feels like a large mass inside this watch is moving. It's been released. You hear that? You hear that? Dirt bikes aren't allowed on the street. Nobody cares. I'm going to just see if this microphone on here will pick up the sound, the metallic ping of that date change. You hear that? Also, did you see that? Right at midnight, whoever set this up did a great job. But that's a beautiful sound. It just lets you know everything is just clicking right in. It feels great. And let's say I was traveling here. I'll let the watch run. and now I was just going to set my time zone backward across the international date line. There's where that date change happens either way. Going back forward, I'm bringing it back to the 24th.
So I figure I should probably also throw the watch on wrist, let you see how that looks. I have a 7 1/4 inch wrist. It's tall, but not particularly wide. Wait, I think I have that right. This is height, and that's width. And what is this? It doesn't matter. It's 7 1/4 inches. That's what I know.
And I think this watch wears perfectly. Lug to lug is not too long. You can see I don't have much in the way of overhang unless I really try to exaggerate things, and even then it's well within. But even on a taller wrist, so that I feel like my wrist is more like a 7 or even 6 3/4 inch wrist without this height, but it still wears beautifully. There is a fair amount of taper to the bracelet. I was surprised when I first got it to see just how thin this part feels on the wrist. Now in the shot, it doesn't really look that thin, and it's not that thin, but it's a lot thinner than other watches that I've worn, and so it did take me some getting used to. It feels a little dainty there, and I thought, gee, this is different, but not so different that you can't get used to it. Sorry for that glare there. But yeah, fits great. The height is perfect. No noise, as I mentioned, on the wrist. No rattlesnaking, no weirdness in that way. It is just a beautiful thing. And while we're here looking closely, I think the last thing I want to mention is just a sort of talking about family resemblance and how history has changed and not changed things. So if we look here, we've got, of course, a vintage style design on my right, and on the left is a much more modern style of design. Now, whether or not you're into, you can see this guy's been asleep for a little while, whether or not you're into the Air King, I happen to love it. I think that colorful pop of green is very much like the colorful pop of red here. I think they're fantastic cousins, so to speak. And they look very similarly sized from head on. You can see, and they frankly, they are, from crown to edge, right? There is not much in it between the two of them. But as we start looking at some of the finer points, let's look at the curve of the lugs, right? It's very similar in the family, but just a little chunkier. This beautiful facet that we used to see on Rolexes. Gonzo, nice sharp edge here between the edge and the top on the newer models, right? Similarly, now this is admittedly a bit of a different comparison, but let's look at the height of these two watches, and you'll see the modern one is much, much thicker. Now, why is that? It's because it has that soft iron cage on the inside. It's also just a more substantial watch, significantly more curve to the lugs. These have that implied curve, but not a lot there. These really have a lot of turn down at the ends. There's no question that they come from the same family, right? At first glance, look at those end links. Nearly identical between the two of them, and that design of the oyster bracelet, of course, not changing much. But the difference on wrist is dramatic. This is a substantial watch. This is a much thinner, vintage feeling watch without having to go way back to like a 34 Air King that truly is small, or a 36 Explorer for some of you that maybe have bigger wrists, or they're just into more modern sized watches. This really treads that line pretty well. This is solidly over it, but not well over it. Again, if we're still talking about family resemblances, we can see here not much difference in it between the new Tudor GMT and this from side to side. In fact, you can see that this is a significantly bigger watch, but it's significantly bigger in presence more than it's significantly bigger in size. Even the height, which everyone maligns about this Tudor GMT, isn't so different from the height here when they're back to back. Now, you might be looking at the screen saying, are you kidding me? Those are very different. But look from the top of the crystal to the bottom of the case back. Not that different. This is just segmented so nicely. Crystal, sloped bezel, bezel edge, thin mid case, then case back that pushes back, where this just has fewer lines, right? Very little crystal showing, then that bezel, then a thick mid case in the case back, although this does have that modern chamfer that they've been doing on the GMT that they didn't do on earlier Black Bays. But again, just the idea of keeping it in the family. What's similar, what's different. This has the chamfer brought back, a little exaggerated, I'd suggest, even to really let you know that it's there compared to the subtlety on the older model. But again, not much difference between them when we're talking a millimeter of width here and there between this and the Air King, between the Air King and the Tudor GMT. So that's it. That's the 16570 Polar. Let me know if you have any other questions or comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Let me know what you think of the new format. Thanks so much for watching. Check out some of my other videos if you're interested, and let me know down in the comments what you want to see next. I've got that Air King, that Tudor GMT, maybe some Grand Seiko surprises, maybe a little micro brand magic as well coming out. Let me know what you're interested in seeing next, and I'll try to cue it up. Thanks so much.